A courageous Scottish general named Macbeth receives the prophecies from three witches saying that one day he will become King of Scotland. Consumed by ambition and spurred to action by his wife Lady Macbeth, Macbeth murders King Duncan and takes the Scottish throne for himself. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth end up suffering with extreme guilt and paranoia as their final downfall, ultimately leading Lady Macbeth to commit suicide. Lady Macbeth is a crucial character in the play, the ambitious and determined wife of Macbeth. She achieves her aim of manipulating her husband into attempting to fulfill the witch's prophecies, that one day he will become the King of Scotland. She is the incentive to Macbeth's murder of King Duncan, and she uses all her willingness and powers of able to persuade and influence her husband as she is fiercely determined to gain the throne. Shakespeare develops and constructs the character of Lady Macbeth throughout the play, from a deeply ambitious and ruthless woman who lusts and aspires for power and position, to her ultimate downfall, resulting in her becoming a victim of eternal guilt and insanity as a consequence of her contribution to King Duncan's death. I chose to create and construct three symbols, each displaying the main motifs of the play Macbeth, including ambition, guilt, and gender and masculinity. As I selected Lady Macbeth to be the character of focus for this assignment, I used a bold and large font as the title of the poster, signifying her power and strongness. I also incorporated the gradient of colours from a purple to black, further explaining the character development from powerful desire to become the Queen of Scotland to complete regret of her actions as she suffers from extreme guilt from the death of the king. I chose to do a gradient as she first starts off ambitious. Purple symbolises strong desire. Then the text transitions to green, which represents guilt, and ultimately black, as everything she has done results in her committing suicide. In Act 5, Scene 1, Lady Macbeth reads the letters, which reveals the witch's prophecies that her husband will become king. I chose to make the symbol representing gender masculinity, a scale of a man and woman balanced at the same level. As the era of Macbeth was composed, women were seen as extremely weak, with no potential at all to commit an act of murder. Lady Macbeth's words, "Unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty, make thick my blood," shows how Lady Macbeth wishes to be changed completely masculine and to be stripped of all her feminine emotions so that she has the courage to go through with the murder. As this is Lady Macbeth's wish, I represented both the man and the woman on the same level. Her strong willingness to completely try to change her character of her gender in order to do such a thing is the initial motive she begins to play with, and the start of her character development from strong ambition to eternal regret. These deeds must not be thought of after these waves, so it will make us mad. This quote from Act 2, Scene 2 is said after Macbeth kills the king, and his wife shames him for being so weak and telling him not to consider it not so deeply. My symbol is to be built around the theme of guilt and the recurring motive of a guilty conscience, meaning that everything that Lady Macbeth has done in order to achieve royalty has eventually resulted in remorseful thoughts. As my symbol, I chose to create a person with a green brain to portray thoughts of manipulation and remorse as the play carries on. The colour green highlights this trait, complemented with the crown to signify high power as in order to obtain their status. It has resulted in her gaining a remorseful state of mind. Lady Macbeth completely shames Macbeth, telling him to not think about it, or it will drive them both crazy, and that he should be embarrassed of his masculinity for already crumbling under the pressure of the murder as soon as the act was over. This shows how her character fully develops into contentness immediately after the deed, and her complete immunity to guilt. In Act 5, Scene 1, Lady Macbeth expresses her frustration as she is unable to wash the imaginary bloodstained hands. The blood she sees is the result of the lack of sleep, which leads to her hallucinations, from the overwhelming guilt of the murder she took part in. The line, "Out, damn spot, out, I say," inspired my symbol of a tap, that instead of running water, it runs blood. I chose to do this as she hallucinating so much as a result of the murder she took part in. She imagines visions that King Duncan's blood is still on her hands, and no matter how hard she tries to get it off, it's almost as if the tap is actually running water as a result of her hallucinations and insanity. This symbol also depicts the motif of blood along the play, as well as further ambition, as her strong desire for her husband Macbeth to be crowned king led her to this final point of psychoticness. This symbol displays her final ending point of character development, from which she initially started off as entirely ambitious towards killing the king to gain royalty to madness, to which she eventually commits suicide. In Macbeth, we as an audience witness her downfall by ambition. I chose to focus on Act 1, Scene 5, as it displays her eagerness to become queen. Act 2, Scene 2, as it shows that after she commits the crime, she feels a sense of happiness and power. And Act 5, Scene 1, as it shows her progression into insanity due to her actions. These scenes had the most quotes that depicted the character development of Lady Macbeth, transitioning from willingness and power to everlasting regret and remorse. On my poster, I used an array of symbols and colours to further display the themes and motifs of the play, including guilt, ambition, and masculinity. In the beginning of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth is ruthless and will do absolutely anything to make sure her husband becomes king, and she is pronounced the queen. She has an entirely heartless attitude and mocks her husband for seeming weak and not masculine enough when he hesitates to do the deed. But as the play progresses, Lady Macbeth gradually becomes more unstrung by her guilt over Duncan's murder. She sleepwalks and hallucinates that her hands are constantly covered in blood. Eventually, the guilt overpowers her, leading her to ultimately commit suicide.